So I'm going to turn it over to Johnnie here, and let me bring that up there. So Johnnie, can you just tell us a little bit about how old were you when you were first incarcerated, and just tell us a little bit about your experience, wherever you want to start.
I was probably turning 18 when I was first incarcerated.
Where was that?
I was in Illinois.
Okay.
Yeah. I did 3 years in there and got out gang-related stuff, and it's just some craziness. Growing up, being young, growing up in a rough city like East St. Louis, the city kind of rubbed off on you sometimes if your support system wasn't tight. You had a tendency to drift off into gang stuff. And even though I was a great basketball player and great athlete, most of the guys that I played ball with was gang related. So that really tied me into it. A lot of activity as well. But yeah.
So what was that like for you at a young age?
At a young age, because my crime wasn't a serious offense, I went to a minimum security where I worked outside the prison. So most of my days was getting up, working out, going to work. Um, it was an adjustment, but because every day I was able to go out and work in the community, it wasn't that bad. Uh, you know, you still have family visits, you had contact visits. I was really young at the time, so I was playing a lot of sports inside. I was on the boxing team, I was on the basketball team, and I still had a job in the city there in Jacksonville.
So when you got out, though, things didn't quite go your way, and you moved to Wisconsin and ended up in Wisconsin prisons.
Yeah, coming to Wisconsin, it was more of a culture shock because I grew up in East St. Louis, and there was really no white people there. And only encounter that I had with white people growing up was playing sports. But when I came to Wisconsin, it was different. You know, everywhere you turn, there was white people in the neighborhood, black people hanging out. Like, whoa, what's going on here? And it became it took some getting used to. Because things that you go to jail for up here, where I come from, they're just tickets and stuff like that. But for just little minor stuff, I noticed up here in Wisconsin, they shouldn't get to jail for it, and that was kind of weird for me.
Why'd you come to Wisconsin?
Well, I came to Wisconsin because my family had moved up here, and at the time I didn't know that they had moved. So when it was getting close for me to get out, I called home, and my brother was like, he said, "Hey man," he said, "we live in Wisconsin." I said, "Man, where is Wisconsin at?" And he got to telling me where it was, and he said, "Man, you can live around white people up here. You can date white girls." I said, "Oh, hell no. You ain't getting me up there and getting me hung." He was like, "No, bro, but I told him you was a good boxer. There's a guy on a boxing gym, and he wanted to meet you." And so I came up here following my boxing career, and plus my family was here. So.
Yeah. So what can you tell us about, can you just describe what life was like for you in prison? And folks, feel free to drop questions in the chat or unmute and ask.
Yeah, Wisconsin system is a lot different than Illinois. Wisconsin system, I think, is more mental. Because in a day, they could be in and out of your room doing room search. You can be sleeping in the middle of the night. They'll wake you up and do a UA test, and they'll wake you up and have you up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, standing outside your door, taking everything off your bed, knocking all your stuff off, just to keep you off balance. I think it was just the mental aspect of Wisconsin was a big thing for me.
Can you tell them what you mean by UA?
A urine analysis to check you for drugs and stuff like that. They do a lot of surprise drops at night.
And drops is another word for UA also.
Drops is another word for UA, yeah. And then, the little ticky-tack, restrictions. You ain't supposed to talk to people who are not in your unit if you're on the walk, going to gym, and sometimes you can get a conduct report for that. Or sometimes guys is coming in on a new, they might have a friend there, and he might see him, and he speak, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And next you get a write up for that. It was really, really petty, but it was more mental than anything here in Wisconsin.
Were there any positives for you being incarcerated?
And the only positive thing for me was I was able to stay physically fit. And I was able to hang on to the Bible. And I think that stuff kind of got me through because, I noticed that, there was guys always working out. There was guys always, doing stuff. And I figured that if I'm going to get through this, I have to be at the top of the fitness chain. And so every day I worked out and, I was teaching boxing lessons at night in the room to my friends. And sometimes we go to rec and I would show people a couple of things to work on. So I can handle myself pretty well. But I think boxing, the whole athletic spectrum and, the word of God, kind of got me through it.
Mm. Were you released on parole?
I was. So I guess I didn't really understand how this parole worked. Well, I didn't understand because I'd never been on it up here. But when I got out, it seemed like it was designed to trap you up.
Well, up here you were out on community supervision, right? So not parole.
Right, yeah.
But when you were in Illinois.
Yeah. That was something totally different.
Something totally different.
That was something totally different.
And did you have access to any kind of education programs?
Not while I was in there because they have now since removed all the education programs. I think now you can get like a GED or HSED, and that's about the extent of it now. But there used to be where you can get degrees and and stuff like that, certifications, but that is no longer.
And we'll talk a little bit more about the programs that are available towards the end. Johnnie, do you want to mention comment about mental health issues in your prison experience?
Yeah. So what I found out is that I had some problems. I guess because the trauma of being incarcerated and what I was there for, and I think being able, when I was getting ready to come home, it was that, oh shit, I got to wear this tag. The prison has tagged me as an offender and this and that, and how am I gonna get a job? And because I'm used to working, I'm used to always having a job, and I think it was more mental when I got out because they was like, well, you can't have this kind of job. You can't have that kind of job. And you got to have a job and stay on parole. And I said, well, if I can't have this kind of job, and this is where my skills are, this is what my skill set, how am I supposed to get a job if they won't hire me because I'm a felon? So it was just a lot of mental stuff dealing with the system here in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. One question is what you were incarcerated for, and I'm going to allow you to answer that if you want, but I'm going to mention that when we're talking about getting educated on the criminal justice system or just kind of looking at systems, it doesn't matter as much what the person was incarcerated for. It's more important to talk about the experiences, but if you want, you can answer that question.
Oh, well, I was on probation and parole for a couple of things, possession of cocaine, and then I got another possession. Then it gave me some time in Huber. Then they gave me some more paper.
Can you say what Huber is?
Huber is when you send it to the county jail and you get out to go to work. And at the end of your work shift, you have to report back to the county jail. So, they gave me some Huber, and I was going to work. and I completed that. And then again, probably about a good 6, 7 months after that, I was revocated off the probation that I was on. And when they revocate you, now there's no more county jail. Now you have to go to prison. So I went to prison, and I think, well, I know, just from the trauma of why I was there, and trying to figure out how am I going to make a living, how am I going to find a job with my ex-con, and they look at your record everywhere you go. And so I like to think, I like to prepare, and there was no way I could do all that, especially with all the rules that was laid against me, and I couldn't work here, and I couldn't do this without the agent's permission, and it was just so much mentally. The mental effect of parole is it's real serious here in Wisconsin.
And we'll hear more next week from another person about community supervision. So if you have questions on that, you can hang on to them for next week. Just a quick technical question. We'll also get into community supervision, probation, or parole. So they're all essentially the same thing. There's technical legal distinguishes between them, but probation, parole, community supervision all basically refer to a person serving a sentence for a crime and they're being supervised within the community. So essentially the same thing. Oh, Johnnie, you were one of the people that got moved out of state.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell them about that?
So when I first went in, they said I didn't qualify to go out of state because I didn't have enough time. But then I guess Wisconsin renewed another contract. So I got shipped to Whiteville, Tennessee. And that was a whole different world down in Whiteville, Tennessee. Because I'm going to keep it real, the Wisconsin penitentiary system is really racist. They are some racist people, and the white guys here, they get better care in prison. Nothing has changed. They go there, they still get better care than African Americans or any other race. But when we got shipped to Whiteville, Tennessee, that dynamic changed because most of the people that worked at that prison was African American, and for those 3 years I was down there, we benefited a lot from being around other African Americans, people who understood us, people who can identify with us. And it was just so much better when we was out of state opposed to being in the state of Wisconsin.
Thanks. But then there were also drawbacks, right? Because you had mentioned, just so that people know, a lot of the issues with private prisons is that not paying correctional officers a good wage. There's a lot of turnover.
Yeah, so in the CCA prisons,
and that's Corrections Corp of America. That's now Core Civic.
Yeah. So in that system, they don't get paid like Wisconsin get paid, and I guess it shows, in the way they treat us. Sometimes someone would cook food and bring us food. The atmosphere, the environment was different. They would bring drugs in. You could smoke pot. You could have alcohol, and it was a different environment in Whiteville, Tennessee. Usually, with the white guys in Wisconsin, they get all the respect, they get all the care and concern, but out there, it was the other way around. The black guys, the African Americans, and they got the best treatment, and they got all the attention and concern, and that was different.
Whether it's good or bad, good attention or bad attention.
Well, down there, a lot of them was just coming to work straight out of high school, and a lot of guys was, we was connecting with them, and it was 90% women working there, and some, and like me, I'm from East St. Louis. I'm not too far from Tennessee, And so I was running into people who had people living in St. Louis and East St. Louis, and we were striking up conversations and building relationships. But it was a different animal down there than it is in Wisconsin.
A couple of people asked, let me just scroll up here. Is there anything you wish people on the outside or people who haven't been incarcerated, is there anything you wish they knew about what it's like to have been incarcerated?
Sometimes, when your loved one call home and say they're being mistreated or something is not right, take them at their word. Call the institution and let your voice be known, because sometimes there are some things that go on and you never hear about those things. Or sometimes when a loved one says something like, oh boy, you think it's exaggeration. But a lot of times you get officers, they come to work, you can smell alcohol on them. Sometimes some of them be on probation and parole themselves. And then they come to work and they may be having a bad day, or, they can write you up a ticket, or they can make you go to your room for 24 hours, or, so it was always a mental game being played in Wisconsin, opposed to being other places.
Thanks. Any other questions for Johnnie? You can also unmute and ask.
Johnnie, can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
What do you think is sorely missing as far as in regards to resources for the formerly incarcerated to possibly allow or help them to not go through even like something like recidivism, or just to make their time in regards to bridging the gap between leaving prison and finding some semblance of a life, back in, normal, back in regular society?
Yeah. So with Wisconsin gives you the appearance that is not what they want to happen, because they tell you you can't be around so-and-so, you can't be over here. So if I can't be around good people, someone who can help me put my best foot forward, how am I supposed to pull myself up by my bootstrap if I can't get a job, if I don't have access to mental health? If I'm having trouble building a positive resource system, how can I stay in the world? How can I stay on the streets? When I struggle for mental health, I'm not sharp in my decision making, and it shows in my decision making. So I need the mental health treatment. And then if I can't find a job, I get depressed. Then the depression and then that stuff starts to take effect on you, and then you start to feel worthless. So I think what has to happen is we have to take a focused mental health approach. And once you get it right here, then you can get it right out here. So I think the focus has to be on mental health.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard of the podcast Ear Hustle? I know I listened to some of it.
I have not.
It's a man in San Quentin prison. There's someone went in and followed him, and got a lot of stories in the prison. And then he was actually released, and so they followed him and did some stories out too. But the question was, is that similar to your Wisconsin prison experience? And I think it might be helpful if you want to talk about a comparison between operations in Illinois and operations here. And that'll give a better, just because the Illinois prison system is bigger, won't be the same as San Quentin, but I think
Illinois prison, San Quentin, and then you got Wisconsin. Wisconsin is way over here. In Illinois and other prisons, most of the inmates kind of run things, through the system. And Wisconsin lets you know who run things. They are in charge, and it's not like Illinois or California. It's a whole different system, and I think it's meant to break you. If it don't make you, it breaks you. That's him about the guy jumped off the chair.
I guess so.
So I
Just sensitive topic.
So you get guys who come there and they don't have a good support system from the outside, and pretty soon they go on medicine, they go on Depakote and stuff like that. They try to kill the pain by numbing the mind and being out of it, so they don't have to focus on the time that they have to do. So they go on these medications. And then sometimes, you hear guys laying in the bed, they crying, and I don't think I'm gonna make it. And you can hear the depression, you can hear the anxiety, you can hear this stuff in them, and yet there's no treatment or there's no activity to address those issues. People go and you can write out a request to go see the doctor, and it's like everything happens to you. They give you Tylenol. You can break your arm, they give you Tylenol, and that's it. And that's how they treat you, unless you lose consciousness or something, and then they're forced to take you to an outside doctor to see a real doctor. But I think the system here is more of a mental strain than anything.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions? So we talked about the trauma of the mental impact of incarceration. Is there something I can do to impact that? So that's a good question. I mean, I think one of the main impacts would be to keep doing things like this and learning more about what opportunities are out there. Along with Nehemiah, there's also a statewide group called Expo that is all people who are formerly incarcerated working on policy across the state. One of the impacts of truth in sentencing was, the tough on crime mentality was to pull a lot of the education programs and a lot of the treatment programs and any recreational things that were going on. I mean, some still exist, but there was a dramatic decrease in funding for programming in our prisons over the 80s and the 90s, which, to people's detriment. We have a lot of evidence that shows that people who are able to get higher education in prisons have a much lower chance of going back to prison. So I think, one of the big thing that individuals can do to help is to advocate for more programming and resources while people are incarcerated. It's estimated that about 40% of men and close to 90% of women who are incarcerated have some form of mental illness. I think that's probably much higher for men. Those numbers are based off of the number of people who are taking psychotropic medications. So not necessarily someone who's gotten a diagnosis in prison. So those numbers are very high, and it's really important that we figure out how to address those traumas, not just of incarceration, but also of whatever led a person to prison. So that's one thing. And then just learning more about this stuff and making it more normal to talk about. Being incarcerated is sort of, it's sort of a hidden world. That's one of the reasons why I started doing these workshops, is because people say public safety, and it's our reaction usually to kind of write a check. We want to be safe, but what we're doing right now isn't. So I guess that's how I'd answer that. And getting involved in organizations as a volunteer, where you're going to run into people who have been formerly incarcerated. There's a group working on mindfulness. Carmen Alonso is her name. She's local. Center for Healthy Minds is a way that you could look out for those folks to see about getting involved. Let's see, other question here. Independent organizations that audit prisons. So there's one organization called, it's related to healthcare, National, it's NCCHC, the National Council on Correctional Healthcare, I believe is what it is. And they sort of they set standards specifically for health and mental health care for prisons, and they do some evaluation, but really states are in charge of themselves. There's the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism has done a lot of work looking into how our prisons and jails operate. but there's not really, that I'm aware of, a separate organization that's just looking at sort of doing a dashboard on what is available for people. Yeah, mindfulness, yoga, meditation, all of that would be really great in there. As I said, and as Johnny said, there's not really much by way of mental health care in our prisons, except for if a person is in a serious situation, they may get to go to WRC, the Wisconsin Resource Center. When people get out, there also aren't that many resources unless you have people to advocate for you and get you connected. So resources exist, but also there aren't a lot of providers that have a good understanding of what the challenges related to incarceration are, which makes a divide.
Yeah, especially coming home. A lot of guys, they come home and there's no more connection to the community. There's nothing. So when you're coming home from prison and you got that X on your back, or now you're getting back out, or where you probably was revocated and you were just snatched off your job, maybe those people don't want to give you another chance because the way you exit the job, or, maybe because you're an ex-felon, it's hard to find a job. And it is. It's hard to find a job. But with me, I was always able to. I went through a lot of the temp agencies, and people kept asking me back and kept calling, can we have that guy back? And then she was like, oh, wow. She said, they really like you. So I was able to get permanent, positions at places. But when you get guys coming home and that mental health ain't right, it's hard to deal with the day-to-day stuff. It's hard to try to focus on trying to find a job when you're trying to walk a thin line where, you're on parole, you're not supposed to be over here, or you're not supposed to be around a certain individual. All that can take a mental effect on you as you try to move through your day-to-day. And then when that depression and anxiety and all that other stuff sets in, it's hard to focus and make choice decisions when you're not mentally stable.
Yeah. When's the last time you were in prison?
2010, was it? Yeah.
And when's the last time you were on any form of super? When did you get loose from the DOC?
So I'm gonna tell y'all this story. I was sentenced in '97, and I had 10 years parole.
Probation.
10 years probation when I got out. Do you know it took me 21 years to get off 10 years probation? All because I kept being put on hold. They'll put me on hold for 60 days here, for 90 days here. Then they might revocate me for 18 months here. Then I got to come back and start over again. Took me 21 years to get off 10 years probation.
Yep, but you're off.
Yeah.
Congratulations. In 2018. So and you also got to vote.
And I got to vote for the first time. When was it?
It was last year.
Yeah, I got to vote for the first time last year, ever.
And voted in every election since then. It was pretty cool. Yeah, MUM, Madison Urban Ministry, they're now known as Just Dane. So yeah, also a really great organization to get in touch with. No silly questions here, Amy or Scott, whichever one asked. The legislative committee that has the most influence over DOC in the budget, there isn't really, I mean, these things move through the legislative process just like anything else. A lot of bills will start as a committee in the House and pass the House, move to the Senate. So I mean, really, and beyond just the State Department of Corrections, don't forget that on a county level, those are where the jail decisions are made. So you can really get involved at any level. In what I've heard from elected officials is that they're not hearing from people about this issue. I mean, they hear about clean lakes and bike paths, but they're not getting like people banging down their doors talking about incarceration. Your elected officials work for you. That's why they're elected in, to do what you want them to do. So if you find an interest in something that you want to change, make sure you're talking to them. And one piece of advice, when you contact your elected official, sometimes they might turn it around on you and say, well, there isn't enough money in the budget, so what would you suggest I cut? That's not your job. Your job is to tell them what you want. It's their job to figure out how to make it happen. So don't feel like you have to have all your ducks in a row before you let your elected officials know what you're doing. Go ahead.
And that's another thing. People who've been to prison and who are now coming back, to the community, they don't have a lot of people advocating for them and for, to have better programming, to have more access to jobs and housing and other resources. Now there are starting to be a few organizations, where, when I first got out, there wasn't a lot. There are a few more out here doing things now. But, when you come out and you don't have somebody in the system, somebody in the community already that can help you plug into a job, that can help you plug into groups, and that can help you plug into some positivity stuff. It's hard because you're home now. There's another mouth to feed in the household, and you're not putting food on the table, and you want to put food on the table, and you can't get a job. So if I can't get a job, if I can't help provide for my family, what's my next move? So now I got to do some wheeling and dealing. Then there you go, I'm back in prison again for trying to put some food on the table, because I went out to wheel and deal. So we need jobs. We need a focus on mental health and jobs and education. I didn't know it was that many adults who couldn't read. That just blew me away. When I found out there were adults who couldn't read, because I thought everybody could read. But when I was talking to God and it's like, hey, read this for me. Man, read your own mail. It's like, oh man, I can't read. You an adult and you can't read? That blew me away. And then I found out that it was more and more and more, and people who couldn't read. And then I started to understand why a lot of them was always angry. They was using anger as a front to keep people at bay, because maybe if somebody found out they couldn't read, and they would make fun of them. And I was like, holy shit, that blew me away.
Yeah. So the question about a caseworker is a little complicated. So there are social workers in prison, but there certainly aren't enough to deal with all of the people that are going in and out. If people are being released from prison on supervision, they'll then have an agent to help them a little bit. But again, the caseload is huge on that.